Welcome to Sunday Science, where we dive into a few recent scientific articles and their translation into our modern lives. Here is your host, Brent W. Laartz, MD.
Everyone, welcome to Sunday Science again, episode 5, February 2026. Very apropos topic today, given that this is Super Bowl Sunday. 4 articles on longevity in sports. We're going to start out with pro football, talking about the association between playing professional American football and longevity. Then we're going to move on to the Copenhagen City Heart Study, where basically we show that different sports add years to our lives. And then we're going to talk about elite athletes to determine how they fare with regard to longevity. And then we're going to move to the study everybody's been talking about recently. This year's study basically showing that a variety of sports is best, and potentially that there is some hormesis going on here with regard to sports, and maybe too much is not any better than a small amount of exercise. However, we'll talk about some caveats there. Okay, so starting out, we're going to share some interesting data here. Okay, so let's start out right away. Here as I share the screen here. All right, so this is the pro football study. If you can see that over my shoulder there is some of the study here showing, if you look on the left, and if you're not showing a video, if you are listening to this on a podcast, let me tell you that the graph we're looking at is the probability of death. And if you look at the full National Health Survey, that the probability of death is approximately 0.05 per person years. And all football players come in lower than that, which could be expected. They are athletes, right? However, if you subtract out and do a restricted sample of the National Health Survey and take those people who are younger and employed, which our football players are, and a few other different demographics, and if you restrict that sample, it becomes approximately the same as all football players. If you do then also in the middle of the study there, taking out football linemen, those people, those football players do approximately the same as far as their probability of death as the full NHIS sample, but that again is not age matched. Those are all comers. Those are not in the same socio-demographic region here. But all other football players still retain, in other words, other positional players, people who are potentially less obese, maybe lower size, less likely to have injuries. And so if you take all other football players, they still match to those age and socio-demographic status players. And if we move on to the next, it's basically pretty much similar where we tease out the different players based on position, either lineman or non-lineman. And again, it plays out that the linemen do much worse than the rest. Okay, so here, this graph shows, and here they teased out people and players who had been drafted, but they never played a professional game versus a player who was drafted and played at least one professional game. So here's the same size of a player. If they're on the left, it's the offensive and defensive linemen, and other professional players or other position players on the right. On the left, the offensive and defensive linemen, if they did not have a single professional game, they actually lived 2 years longer than the person who played at least one professional game. Hence, Why would that be? If they played one professional game, but they were both drafted, you would think they'd be the same size and they'd still be potentially trying to um, maintain the same physical stamina, etc., throughout a career that they were trying to get into and play a professional game. So potentially it's thinking, and the teasing out here is potentially that injury might be the reason. And then on the other side, the same status of having never played a professional game does not gain any additional years of life than someone who played in at least one professional game. It's 59.1 versus 59.2 years of age. So, not years of age, probability of percent surviving as an average. Okay, um, so, so certainly now we can see that some of the data where we have seen that professional football players and elite athletes potentially live longer, but there is a caveat to that. Okay, and there are certainly a lot more studies that need to be done. The Copenhagen City Heart Study was a study in Copenhagen, Denmark, and this Danish study wanted to tease out different sports that people played recreationally, either team sports or racket sports or solo sports, and whether they added extra years of life. And the main takeaway here is the bottom bar graph on the bottom right. You can see that the adjusted for age, sex, weekly volume, smoking, education, drinking habits, etc., tennis and badminton had a much higher level of added years of life than other sports. So you can see, let's go start from the top at sedentary. These are the reference. So the hazard ratio of mortality is 1.00. So they are the reference. And you can see that health club activities added on average 1.5 years of age. And that crosses the 1.0 hazard ratio line. So it probably is not significant. So just plain working out and doing health club activities is not a significant improvement. Swimming and calisthenics and cycling had approximately similar numbers, around 3 to 3.7. Also, jogging added 3.2 years, and their hazard ratio was significantly below the 1.0. Then you had soccer, which was a league above, and potentially this, we'll talk about this in a minute as to why that is a league above at 4.7 years. And then above that, badminton and tennis, 6.2 and 9.7 years added of age. So interesting to see this study. This was back in 2018. This would suggest that that maybe racket sports were better and team sports were better than solo sports, such as swimming, calisthenics, cycling, and jogging. And all of them were better than health club activities, which who knows what health club activities, different people could take that as a different status. The health club in Denmark could have been something where they were going and walking for a small amount of time, or maybe even just socializing and not even exercising. Anyway, that's a little bit facetious there, but um, interesting study nonetheless back in 2018. Next, we're going to turn our eyes to the elite athletes. So this would then take this to another level, right? So an elite athlete is going to take that to another level. This is not just recreational. These have been shown in multiple studies to have improved mortality in elite athletes. However, there is some caveat to here. Again, not every sport is deemed equal, just like we talked about football, that not every lineman versus for example, a quarterback or a running back who are in much better shape, potentially more cardiovascular versus only strength training. And here, this was in the British Journal of Sports Medicine back in 2015. You can see that endurance sports, which they took in Finland. So these are Finnish people. This was a control study. Control was on the left line there. You can see this hashed line on the left, maybe what we call a dotted line. I'm not sure how you call that a dotted line, but that's what it was. That control had a certain proportion surviving over the course of 100 years. And that curve you can see. And you can see there are three other curves there. And the best curve, the furthest off to the right, is the dash, is the solid line. And that, compared to the control, has a hazard ratio of 0.62. So they're 38% less likely of dying at any particular age on average. And then there's another line there that's very close to the team, close to that endurance line. Endurance sports, let me get to you exactly what sports we're talking about here, because in Finland, it's not all the same sports as we have in the United States of America, but cross-country skiing, middle distance runner, and long distance running. So those endurance sports, despite what we talked about earlier with the recreational jogging being middle of the line, this is actually the higher of the line. These are people who were very cardiovascularly fit and probably not a lot of strength training. Obviously, some all elite athletes in cross-country skiing, running, also have some strength training. But then you have the team sports, which is next, has a hazard ratio of 0.71. So about 29% less likely of dying than the control sedentary person who is not an elite athlete. So then, and this defined as soccer, basketball, ice hockey, jumpers, short distance runners, and hurdlers. Okay, so then you can see a line there that is a bit closer just to the right of the control line, power sports. And these were boxing, wrestling, weightlifting, and throwing sports. These are much more likely to be larger individuals, and they are much more likely to have injuries, maybe potentially traumatic brain injuries, but also they may use performance enhancing medications. But I think that potentially, and some of these other sports could also, but these might be a little bit more likely to. Throwing sports, those such as discus and shot put and javelin, may have more likely to have more obese, larger frames, etc. That hazard ratio is only 0.85, and some of these studies have shown that there is not a statistical significant difference between that and the control. So again, here, interesting to see that these, again, endurance sports are better. Team sports where you may have some strength training also, but also certainly some cardiovascular fitness as well. But the power, which is strictly strength and less cardiovascular exercise, is closer to the control. Okay, so next, let's move on to the study in British Medical Journal Medicine 2026. This is the study everybody's been talking about, and this is the total physical activity. This study's physical activity types, variety, and mortality results from two prospective cohort studies. So this study took different types of exercise, and this is total physical activity. So this graph here is basically taking any physical activity and seeing what the mortality is. And all-cause mortality in the blue line there with these persons who had X amount of physical activity. And these are Met hours per week. So probably around 20 to 40 Met hours per week is going to be running 3 to 4 times a day, something like that. And so as you move out this line here, at a certain number, at 20 Met hours per week, you have the line coming down from 1.00 hazard ratio down to about 0.75 for all-cause mortality. and that points maybe 0.7. And so about a 30% decreased risk of dying. But it plateaus and goes off onto up to 100 Met hours per week, which could be potentially running, an hour, 7 days a week, something along those lines. So that shows that running or walking 2 to 3 days a week is the same as 100 Met hours per week, and that's 7 day a week running, right? So the much higher level of exercise is not necessarily any better. And this is borne out with respiratory disease, the likelihood of dying of a respiratory disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease. Other causes actually tends to increase as you head out to, and that's in that yellow, more of an orangish line that increases beyond the pink cancer line there. And it comes back up to like 0.9 there as you get to a higher physical activity. And I'm not sure how this is explained, whether this is explained by bicycling and potentially getting hit by a bus perhaps, or something along those lines. I don't know. This certainly other causes is a nebulous portion here. This next part teases out the different types of exercise, and essentially here showing that walking potentially is the best here, and especially walking is the best. And at individual physical activities, it decreases down to around 0.75, so about 25% decrease just with 5 Met hours per week. I can tell you that a couple of things are at play here. But again, it plateaus going all the way out to 40 Met hours per week. No benefit from 5 to 40 Met hours per week. Let's go to the yellow line. We've got jogging that comes down to about 0.85 as you get to the 5 Met hours per week. But as you start getting up to 15, it's a U-shaped curve. So it improves, but then it starts heading back up toward a 1.00. Similar lines are for running, but this is more of a W-shaped curve where you have increase in, sorry, a decrease in mortality, then a slight increase, and then further decrease from there. Again, some element of something called hormesis. And what is hormesis? Hormesis suggests that there is a middle ground that is the best. You want to have some stress, but you don't want to have too much stress because some stress is good for you. Too much stress is a problem. Some exercise is good, but too much may be not good for you. So there are multiple different studies showing some type of hormesis effect for a lot of different things. Certainly there are medications that might be at play here. You'd want a certain amount of some medication to help longevity, but too much could be bad because it might be harmful, right? So again, swimming is one of the sports here that actually does not have much of an effect here in this sport. And again, these are based on 2 prospective cohort studies. And let's see here. The W-shaped and the hormesis. Here is where what is being talked about a lot right now. And this is basically the variety. And if you take certain levels of activity, especially in the third part here, if you take this study, and we're going to look just at the right-hand side of the graph here, these were persons who had the most amount of activity. And if there was only a small amount of variety and you really only participated in one sport, let's say it's jogging, and you didn't do any other kind of sport, you were in the blue dashed line there. And you can see that there is improvement in mortality, about a 10% decrease in mortality. And then in the yellow, you can see that with increasing variety, having 2 or 3 sports that you're involved with, again, there is an improvement there down to approximately 18 to 19% decrease in mortality. But the pink, and these are the people who had the most variety in their sports that they are participating in. And you can see there right at about 20% improvement. So here is the study where they're basically harking and talking about that variety. And this makes sense, right? And we'll talk about this in just a second. Basically, just a really quick look at the left-hand side here. And if these are the people who had the lowest amount of added activity, you can see that neither of these, a variety, is not going to really impact things compared to just one sport because you're really not having that much physical activity to impact your mortality to begin with. Perhaps these are in that spot where it was only less than 5 METs per week or Met hours per week, I should say. And this may have been in that graph. And certainly if you're jogging less than 5 Met hours per week, it doesn't decrease that much. Same thing with if you're doing that less than 5 Met hours per week. In other words, running or walking 5 minutes once a week, then why does it matter whether you're taking that 5 minutes and splitting it up and doing 1 minute of walking, 1 minute of tennis, and 1 minute of something else? So I'm just being a little bit exaggerating there. But so this, I think the right-hand part of this study and what everybody's talking about the variety and the importance of variety in our exercise and different sports that we do is a really telling situation because really we already know that it's important to have both cardiovascular fitness and strength fitness and strength and grip strength, leg strength, and it's important to have that VO2 max be at the tip top, and that will improve your longevity. And so this is an interesting part to this. We're going to tease this out just a little bit more here, and we'll talk about this. Certainly, if you're playing tennis and you're having great balance, and if you are also jogging and therefore having great VO2 max, and you are also doing the racket sports and having some grip strength from playing that and all the balance that comes with it, and having all different of these types and having a high amount of activity like is on the right-hand side of this graph, then you're going to benefit the most out of that and have the least likelihood of dying out of all these. One caveat to this, and this comes from the Outside magazine. They took one additional step and took the data from this study and put out this graph. So this is from Outside Online. Look at this graph here showing that there is a relative risk of premature death. And you can see that the way they adjusted it, and here you can see that they comes down to about 20% decreased risk of dying compared to control. But they adjusted these. And they adjusted these and they controlled for BMI, cholesterol, family history of cardiovascular disease, ethnicity, smoking status, diet, and blood pressure. So let's think about this. Now, a couple of those might not really be that much of a difference between the two control and the person who exercised a lot. But let's say your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your diet, your BMI might, your smoking status certainly would change, right? If you're putting in if you're the fifth quintile of total weekly physical activity, which is out here on the right, and you are putting in 100 METs hours per week, are you likely to be a smoker? And are you likely to have a high cholesterol? And are you likely to have an abnormal blood pressure? And are you likely to have an abnormal diet compared to a control person? But if you then take that person with that really good blood pressure and a really good cholesterol, really good BMI, and you compare him or her to a person who is sedentary, who has that same really good blood pressure, then you might not really have that much of a difference there, right? So potentially, as you get out here to the fourth and fifth quintile of physical activity, there could be a an actual confounding from doing too much controlling and for some of these different effects, right? So part of the benefit of that higher quantity of exercise is lower cholesterol, diet, and blood pressure, right? So why take that out? Why make them be compared to a person who has normal blood pressure? Why not just do a randomized controlled trial? And obviously, these are prospective cohort studies. They're not randomized. Um, they're not randomized and controlled. These are cohort controlled studies. So this could be a confounding reason. And so if you don't control that, and you can see in the blue line here that if you don't adjust, that those people continue to have a better relative risk of premature death improvement all the way out to the fifth quintile, and they have about a 35% decreased risk of death compared to the other ones if you don't control for those things. In other words, take all comers who went to the fifth quintile versus the control, and you then look at that. There is a 35% relative decreased risk of death. So and we can also kind of look toward the elite athlete studies above. We had the previous studies that showed that persons who are recreational had an improvement in their um, longevity, but then elite athletes, similar athletes. So, for example, jogging, adding 3.2 years, but yet endurance athletes, which include runners, had a 38% decreased risk of dying, which probably, we didn't obviously see what the added years of life was here, but it's probably compared to a control, probably is going to be much more than 3.2 years. So that kind of goes toward that same showing. Okay, so so some takeaways from here. Let's stop sharing here. Um, Stop our share and bring us back to here and our takeaways here about the variety of sports. If I am involved with tennis, let's say, and I'm involved with jogging, and I'm involved with soccer, and I'm involved with some other sport that involves and strength training and or some sport that requires strength training, because certainly running doesn't require that much strength training, um, then I'm going to have the best of all of these different worlds. Because what does it take for a human as opposed to a laboratory animal, which we know there are a lot of different studies with laboratory animals and longevity, and it's difficult to do with humans. But we know that humans need these kind of things to live longer. They need cardiovascular fitness. They need this grip strength and or other measures of strength. You also need balance because you don't want to fall, because falling is a huge part of our problem in older age that leads to morbidity and leads to inactivity. We need to keep a good cognition. We need to keep good social connection and cognitive demands, full body engagement. So that variety of sports. Now, the above study, the first study we talked about where racket sports were important, right? So certainly these sports kind of also have the best of all worlds. They do have a high intensity interval training, so they have They have a spike in heart rate and then recover repeatedly, and that improves heart rate variability. That improves heart rate recovery and that ability to recover, which is very important for our cardiovascular exercise and our VO2 max. Okay, so it requires full body engagement. So you're not only using your arms to hit the ball over the net, you're also using your feet to run side to side and forward and backwards, and you're using your whole shoulder girdle. You're using your hips, knees, and getting down lower potentially, and or jumping. A lot of different full body engagements used there. Also, there's a social component. Racket sports and certainly other team sports are important here. And I think that's why some of these team sports that, such as soccer, were in the middle here, whereas jogging and walking were less likely because there's less social engagement there. Cognitive demands here of a racket sport versus some other sports. Doesn't take much cognitive demand to jog 5 miles, let's say, for example, like what I did today. I basically had a tracker that tracked exactly how far I was going. I had to read the numbers periodically, and the thing told me exactly how fast I was going. Now it's kind of all done for us. But tennis, you have to really keep score, keep track, keep figuring out where exactly the line is, and judgment, and a lot of hand-eye coordination there. And it also involves grip strength. So you're gripping a racket, right? So it involves a lot of forearm activity to really either put forward spin on the ball or maybe backspin. And it requires balance. You are starting and stopping. You are moving to the sideline or to the end line, and you have to stop immediately. You have to hit that ball, and you have to hit that ball with a force that then you don't want to fall after you do it. And certainly, people who are less active are finding this out with pickleball, because pickleball is a sport where there's becoming a lot of injuries of people who are getting involved and getting involved when they weren't involved in sports before. So, badminton and tennis were some of the highest recreational sports involved here in our first study we talked about. Injury is important. The takeaway of injury and maybe traumatic brain injury from other sports, such as football, such as boxing, which have potentially either the same or less or barely better survivability compared to control of people who are not involved in sports. So, and then cardiovascular and strength is important. Social and cognitive benefits of multiple of these different sports is important. So swimming seems to be less. It's a solo sport, although there is teams obviously there, but we're talking about people who are potentially very cardiovascularly fit, right? Think of Michael Phelps and how cardiovascularly fit he is. But this is, I think, we were talking about elite sports, but swimming was not one of those studied. We were talking about the recreational sports when we were talking about swimming was right in the middle. Again, jogging was lower, calisthenics was lower, health club and gym, basically the same as a control sedentary person. Okay, and again, linemen in pro football sports, not so good, but other positional players were better. And I think some of this has to, in other sports, such as what we talked about, power sports, boxing, wrestling, weightlifting, and throwing, which have a lot of strength training, but not so much cardiovascular. I'd beg to differ about wrestling. I don't know if they're talking about professional wrestling here versus college wrestling, but I can beg to differ about wrestling, about how much VO2 max we had, but there potentially is injury there. And so these power sports and or contact sports have, and being linemen, less likely to give you a survival benefit and longevity benefit if you are participating in these. Again, I can't stress enough, and I would like to incorporate this into my life, is the variety of sports. And I already love a variety of sports already, hiking, running, and doing a lot of different things that that, and I've been involved in tennis in the past, and I haven't played tennis as much recently, but I'm going to get more involved again, especially now that I hear, hey, we live longer if you play tennis, right? But I think it's the variety of sports. That's the important thing. Okay, so um, all right, so thank you for hanging out with here tonight on a Sunday, right after the Super Bowl. Um, Great game showing that the elite in sport is amazing. Some of the study, big defensive game, a lot of punts, a lot of kicking, right? So those would be your other positional players, the punters and the kickers that were playing this game 90% of the time. These people were the ones that won the game, but they're also potentially ones that might live the longest. They are usually they are as strong as some of our other positional sports, and they do have some of the cardiovascular improvement also. So potentially the game was won by the people who will live the longest, maybe potentially. So let's see. So um, I appreciate you hanging out with me, and I appreciate you coming along with me on my ride of trying to live longer, trying to live healthier, and trying to find out what to do, what the science is behind all of this. And I look forward to seeing you again. Again, we are on YouTube. There's also two YouTubes, Go On Pro and my Brent W. Laartz MD page. There is a Substack for Brent W. Laartz, the Go On Pro podcast, and there is the goonpro.com website. So Go On Pro, GOUNPRO.com is the website. You can catch most of our activities there. And then go to our social media pages from the TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads, and Substack. We have some social media there as well. Look forward to talking with you. We start tomorrow, and we are announcing this already to the world that we are tomorrow starting with a Monday night, 8 o'clock, great Zoom call, 30 minutes every Monday. And we're going to be basically just providing a community for everyone out there to get involved and see what I'm doing. This is not a medical advice system. This is just creating a community where you can talk to everyone. We can comment and bring everybody in to meet each other, to have some camaraderie around getting our best foot forward in the areas of diet, exercise, sleep, and creativity and connection. This is what I'm trying to create, that fourth pillar out of the five pillars. We have five pillars, five-sided table, right? So it's a pentagon table, five legs. The fourth leg here, connectivity and connection with every one of you. I want to connect with you, and I want you to connect with me to try to figure out what we need to do. And we are not going to be on this same journey down the exact same path. I appreciate what everybody's doing to improve their life, and half of it is up here in our brain, right? Up here in our mind and what we can do. And that connectivity and that accountability, me having you and you having me there to support us, support everyone, is what's important. And that is what we're going to try to create here with this Zoom call every Monday night at 8 o'clock. Okay, so join us. If you are a member of the Substack community, and you can be a free member for now. At some point, you might have to be a paid member to be part of this Zoom, but right now, it's going to be free for everyone. We're going to allow as many people as can fit on. I don't have a premium Zoom account, so it may be limited at some point if and or I might pay if we have enough paying people, then I may pay for the premium Zoom or whatever, who knows. But I appreciate you being there. Appreciate you. We may have zero people on the call, and I'll be hanging out with myself and my girlfriend and my dogs, and we'll hang out and talk. And maybe I'll talk to my dogs about how I've taking them out for a walk, and I'm improving the diet of my dogs and that kind of thing. My girlfriend is participating along with me on this crazy carpet ride through longevity, and I love being here, and I love discussing it with you. Love having my own accountability. Love having my own plan weekly to try to get better every week to advance myself down the line toward living better and longer, trying to change the family dynamic. In other words, from my parents who lived and basically came of age in the industrial processed world, took full advantage of it, though they certainly fed us good unprocessed foods at times, but they bought into the Cheerios, they bought into the macaroni and cheese, they bought into the canned beef stews and that kind of thing for us sometimes, and tried to make them, they had a better life after that, right? And so better life was a simpler life, but it wasn't the way their grandparents lived, which was actually the better life. Even though it was a tough life for our grandparents, great grandparents, who were having to till their own land and plant their own foods, grow their own foods, that process of doing some of your own thing, don't think that it's going to be easy to do this and have an unprocessed life. I'm going to need to learn to plant my own food. I'm already fermenting my own food. I've been doing that for years, and creating my own hot sauces, creating my own different products that I can use to decrease the amounts of plastic and processed foods in my life. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night. Again, happy Sunday. Appreciate you being here.
This site and any information communicated within it are not intended as medical advice. The information herein is not intended as medical care, diagnosis, or treatment of any medical condition. No component of this content, including discussion or comments, shall be construed or implied as establishing a doctor-patient relationship. Before you translate or copy any of the information, diet, exercise, or products utilized herein or on any social media post to your own practice, consult your own research, physician, therapist, or nutritionist for your own health. No warranties or claims are made as to the benefits or risks of any treatments, diet, exercise, or products herein. Research any treatments, diet, exercise, or products thoroughly before trying for yourself. Referral, affiliate, or advertising fees may be garnered by this site.